What's up, everybody? BigSweetC here with you. Got a fantastic new Another Gamer Dad podcast, episode number 7. And eventually I'm going to run out of fingers, so I won't be able to do that anymore. But at least the first 10, I'm going to do that. So cheesiness all the way. But it's episode number 7. I'm so happy to be bringing in this to you. I've got a ton of stuff I want to talk about. One is... it's a political season, so I want to talk a little bit more politics with you. I said I was going to do that throughout this year just because of the election coming up. My gaming segment, we're going to talk about some board games. Sports segment, we're going to go over my fantasy basketball and fantasy hockey teams. And then my film section, the cinema section, I want to go something. My wife and I came across something that reminded me of what made me want to be a filmmaker at one point. And that leads me to believe, wonder if it's still something that I do want to do. But we're going to start like we always do in the old, I talk about you and I educate you, hopefully, and I enlighten you in the ways of the world. We're going to start with this idea because it is, again, a presidential election year. Right now we've got 2 major candidates, and then we've got a third party who's actually more major than any third party in the history of my lifetime. But we do have an election coming up this year, and I kind of want to talk about why our elections and this false idea of what we call democracy here in America. And again, I am talking specifically to the U.S. audience and about the U.S. audience, in case you're not a U.S. watcher, because that's where I live. That's where I grew up. That's the history that I know more than any other history. And so I want to talk about this idea, this false idea of what we consider a democracy. And I call it a false idea because, as I was saying, we have 2 major parties, and then we have some fringe third-party candidates mostly. And now we'll get into that a little bit later. But you can't really call yourself a democracy if you only have 2 parties. That's what George Carlin used to call the illusion of choice, paper or plastic, right? Do I want bottled water or tap water? It's not really a choice. If we go into the grocery store and I go down the cereal aisle, there's 150 different cereals that I can choose from. That would be a democracy of choice. When you have just 2, it's not really a democracy. It's just a choice. The illusion of a choice. You pick him or her. And it really is an illusion because both parties are essentially the exact same. And this is why a lot of people, most of the voting population in America, just plain and simple doesn't vote. 40% of the population, the biggest voting bloc, so to speak, in America, is the people that just don't vote. That's 40% of this country. Of the 60% that do typically vote, roughly half of them are considered independents. So our whole election, right, our democracy of choice, really comes down to about 25% of the population, if that, right? So you've got 330 million people in the United States being governed by roughly 20 to 25%. Okay? So this is what I mean by the false idea of democracy, because it's not really a democracy. People aren't voting. They're not participating. When they do vote, they're not getting anything in return for their vote. They're going in there and they're voting for the term, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard it, the lesser of 2 evils. They're not going to vote for somebody that they think is going to benefit their lives. They go out and they vote against who they think is going to harm them more than help them. And so, again, you're not really getting a choice in that instance. You're just basically going through the motions and deciding, I guess this guy is better than that guy. And most of the time, it comes down to 2 things: guns and identity. That's the only difference between the 2 parties. And that's why nothing is going to fundamentally change, because if we ever did get gun regulation, then the Democrats would have no reason to separate themselves from the Republicans, and you would just be choosing between 2 Republicans. If we ever did decide You can be whoever you want. You can't be whoever you want. Roe v. Wade has been set into law, and gay marriage is officially legal in the Constitution. There'd be no difference between Democrats and Republicans. They both support endless war. They both support not giving you health care. They both support pretty much absolutely everything when it comes to infrastructure. They don't invest in it. None of them do. Now, I know we had the Inflation Reduction Act, but as you can tell, it hasn't done anything to reduce inflation. We're still at the highest levels that we've seen in my lifetime, probably since the Great Depression. We've got boats running into bridges. We've got trains going off the track because the track is no longer straight and sturdy in Palestine, East Palestine, Ohio. We've got environmental catastrophes going on. Everywhere you go, there's some sort of DuPont leak. Boeing planes are falling out of the sky. And so on the stuff that everyday Americans really need, they both agree. They don't fund it. Doesn't matter what the people say. We have technically been deemed not a democracy, but an oligarchy. I believe it was Princeton did a study about 3 or 4 years ago now, and that said 80% of what people want never gets done. But almost 100% of what the funders of these people's campaign gets done immediately. We just had the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of this country during COVID, $5 trillion printed from the Federal Reserve, almost all of which went to the top 1%, 2%, 3%. Almost none of it went to the people. And so while you were getting your $1,200 stimulus check, these big businesses were getting subsidized for losing profit because no one was allowed to go anywhere. And so the idea of this false democracy is kind of what I want to focus on, and how we got there specifically, and why it's never going to get any better unless we force change. It's called the Ratchet Effect. To begin, I want to tell you, if you don't know what a ratchet is usually a gear. It can be a gear, it can be a joint, it can really be anything, but it's usually a gear that allows motion to go in one direction, but not the other direction. And so how this pertains to our political system here in America is you have a conservative right, the Republicans. When they get into power, they turn everything to the right as soon as they can and as much as they can until they get out of power. Then when the Democrats get in there, instead of moving the overture back to the left, instead of moving the gear back to the left, they make that right, whatever the far right extremist they can get, they make that the new center. So we're always going more and more conservative. We never go more and more liberal. And so we've come almost a complete 180 degrees. There was a very famous quote by, it's not really famous because they don't tell you about it anymore, but Barack Obama went on TV and he admitted that had this been the 1980s, he would be considered a moderate Republican. And that's a perfect view of how our political system works, because he's considered by most a super liberal dude, right? A very hip, a very modern, liberal politician. But he's a self-admitted Republican. He has Republican policies that he enacted. Meanwhile, the mainstream media, the voice box, the propaganda machine for the establishment is telling you that this is as far left as you can absolutely go. It started roughly around Bill Clinton. Now, it may have started a little bit before that, but really what I see in the history of American politics is during the Bill Clinton administration. The previous president before Bill Clinton was a dude named George Herbert Walker Bush, or commonly referred to as Bush 1. He got into presidency and he wanted to pass this bill that allowed companies to outsource work to other countries, namely those in Canada and Mexico, those countries of Canada and Mexico. It was called NAFTA, the North American Treaty Alliance, right? And so he pushed and pushed and pushed to get this bill passed because they were dying to get rid of unions, and they realized they couldn't destroy the union, but with NAFTA they could go around these unions, right? And so don't worry, let the unions be there, let them have their say, but we can undercut them by outsourcing this work to countries that don't abide by union law. And so he pushed and pushed and pushed this NAFTA bill. However, at the time, he was going up against a majority Democratic House and Senate. And so not wanting to give, not wanting to give George Bush a win, the Democrats pushed back against NAFTA. The election comes up. Bush does not get reelected. Instead, we elect Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton gets into office, and because he's a Democrat, along with the other Democrats that are in the House, they immediately pass NAFTA, and every manufacturing company in America decides to send their work to somewhere else. Mexico, Canada. Now you have mostly China, Taiwan. And so all of our business, I can't say all of our business because then people will be like, well, my dad worked for Ford. My dad worked for GM. 90% of our manufacturing was outsourced to another country, so companies wouldn't have to pay the labor as much as they would have to do it here. That was a Republican plan passed by a Democrat. So we've got the Republican moving the political system to the right, and we've got a Democrat, instead of moving it back to the center, stopping it where it's at and making that right side the new center. He would also go along and deregulate the banks, which was another thing that the Republicans wanted to do, and it directly tied in. It eventually led to what we know as the 2008 crash. Bill Clinton was in power for 8 years. He also enacted he and Joe Biden also enacted the crime bill, where the whole super predators came from, and which is directly why more black and brown people are locked up per capita than white people. Specifically, that law, and that's why they called them super predators, because they couldn't call them the N-word, they couldn't call them whatever negative stereotype word you can think of for Hispanics. They can't call them that in public, right? Because then they would be deemed racist. So they came up with the term super predators, but everybody knows what a super predator meant. And so that's why black and brown people, and specifically cities of majority color, are in the position that they're in. They were deemed a ghetto. They had this law passed, and now they are in this constant cycle of never-ending ghetto. That was Bill Clinton. After Bill Clinton gets out of office, George W. Bush comes in, Bush number 2, the son of the first Bush. He immediately puts us in to 2 wars. He goes into Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan was because of 9/11. If that's what you want to believe, that's fine. But there's a preponderance of evidence that not only did we know 9/11 was going to happen, but I almost called him Barack Obama. Excuse me. But Osama bin Laden was actively trained in that type of espionage by the United States. And so he leads us into 2 wars, Afghanistan after 9/11, and then he lies us into the Iraq war again because he wanted to finish the job that his dad couldn't finish under his term and boot out Saddam Hussein. He puts us into 2 wars. Those 2 wars put us $1 trillion in debt. Barack Obama runs on the idea of ending those wars, gets into office, and he immediately continues those wars and then expands it to the bombing of 5 other countries, making a total of 7. As soon as he gets into office, he starts bombing Lebanon, Libya, Syria, and 2 others that I'm drawing a blank as of right now. He also encourages Russia to attack us by overthrowing a democratically elected leader of Ukraine in 2014 called the Maidan coup. Other of his proposed campaign promises, talking about Barack Obama, is he wants to give people access to affordable health care. He was running against a man named Mitt Romney. Now, Mitt Romney, before he ran for president, was governor of Massachusetts. And while he was the governor of Massachusetts, he had what was called Romney Care. It was made up by a company called the Heritage Foundation. And the idea was to force people into buying health care to enrich the privately owned health insurance companies. And so he had a stipulation that you could buy into this Massachusetts healthcare. And if you didn't, then you would have to pay higher taxes to help subsidize people who did buy this healthcare. When Barack Obama got into office, he had originally run on the idea of what's called a public option, meaning everybody can just buy from the government, and the government is your health insurance. But instead of offering a public option, he comes up with what's called Obamacare. Obamacare just happened to be the exact same idea as Romney Care. You have these health exchanges that you can buy into, that anybody can buy into. You don't need an employer to buy into it. But if you don't, you pay higher taxes to subsidize those people that do. It was verbatim the exact same thing as Romney Care. So again, you've got George Bush ramps us in, puts us in debt, and then you've got a Democrat running on this idea of slightly moving us back to the left. And when he gets into power, what's he do? He gives us the right-wing conservative plan instead. He ran on the idea of solidifying Roe v. Wade. It was the Supreme Court justice ruling on gay marriage, whether it's legal or not. He ran on the campaign pledge that on day one, he was going to solidify Roe v. Wade. He was going to codify it into law, meaning it would be protected by the U.S. Constitution and nobody could overturn it. If you were a gay couple, you wanted to get married, you were legally allowed to do so in all 50 states in America. Gets into office, doesn't talk about it. He's finally asked about it. And he decides, hey, I know I ran on he didn't say this part, but he runs on the idea of doing it day one. And then he says, well, it's not really my main priority. Because again, if he would have codified that into law, he had a supermajority. He could have easily done it. If he codifies that into law, when he goes to run for his reelection campaign, he is now zero difference than the Republican nominee. There's nothing that they can say, well, I'm going to give you this, because they agree on everything else. They gave the right-wing healthcare plan, so there's no argument there. Republicans were going to keep you doing the same thing. He expanded the wars that the conservatives wanted, so he can't say I'm the anti-war guy. The only thing that he could run on was he was going to codify Roe v. Wade into law. He had the opportunity to do it, actively chooses not to do it, because when he goes to do his reelection campaign, he can't run on anything. He's got nothing that separates him from whoever the Republicans decide to put up for office. The Ratchet Effect. Turn it all the way to the right as far as you can. When you get the opportunity to turn it left, make sure there's that blockage that doesn't allow you to do so. Move it to the right, make that the center. Move it to the right, make that to the center. You never go back to the left, so we always become more and more conservative. Donald Trump gets into office. Now, while I commend him for not perpetuating more warfare, he did stop the funding to Ukraine. That's actually why he was impeached. You can now be impeached because you decide not to go to war with foreign countries. But he did put 3 right-wing conservatives on the Supreme Court. So again, bending the wheel to the right, making sure nothing goes back to the left. Bending it to the right, making sure nothing goes back to the left. Joe Biden is now our current president. He has not accomplished any of his campaign promises. He's said he was going to give us a public option in healthcare. No public option. They don't even talk about it anymore. Remember when AOC and Bernie Sanders and all the leftists were, hey, we need to give people an option that will help them with healthcare, that will guarantee it as a right. And Joe Biden says constantly that under his administration, healthcare is a right. If you have to pay for it, if there's a way that you can't get it, or if there's a way you can get kicked off it, that's not a right. I have the right to bear arms. I can buy a gun. There's nothing stopping me from buying a gun. I have the right to freedom of speech. I can say these things and they can't punish me for it. That's a right. That's a right. I have the right to vote. I can go and I can vote. That's a right. No one can stop me from voting. There is a fundamental difference between access to and a right. And without the idea of, first of all, Medicare for all, public option doesn't even guarantee a right because you still have to pay for it. If you can't afford it, granted it's cheaper than everybody else, but if you can't afford it, you still don't get it. So it's not a right. It's not guaranteed to you by the U.S. Constitution. No public option. He ran on a $15 minimum wage. That's not a thing. Now, he did make an executive order to make federal employees $15 an hour, but he promised to make the country $15 minimum wage. Didn't even try. They actually took that part out of the Inflation Reduction Act so they could get it passed. He ran on the idea of everybody getting $10,000 of student debt relief. Hasn't done that. He has given some people, roughly about 1% of students, have gotten some debt relief, but I had to pay off the rest of my loan. I didn't get $10,000 for it. Mine didn't even cost $10,000. I only owed $8,500 left this year, but I had to pay that off. I did not get that expunged, even though he promised he would do so. Finally, probably the most poignant of his campaign promises was to unite the soul of the country, heal the soul of America. He was going to reunite the country because Donald Trump had split it in half and divided us up. Yet he is still going out there and calling half the population Nazi fascists, white supremacists, racists, misogynists. That is not universal speak for unity. If I don't like what you're saying, and your only rebuttal is to call me a racist or a Nazi or a fascist or a white supremacist, you're not doing anything to bridge the divide. We're not coming to an agreement in any way. You're just calling me names. He still calls half the population racists and white supremacists because they've pledged their vote to his political opponent. Speaking of which, Joe Biden is actively prosecuting his number one political opponent while also simultaneously trying to sue the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign to get them kicked off the ballots. If you are actively trying to bring democracy or keep democracy alive, why are you actively trying to use the law to get everybody else off the ballot and make yourself the only choice? That's not democratic. That's authoritarian. We've got the U.S. National Guard looking like a stormed army in the subways of New York City. When you go into New York City, you literally see guys in army fatigues with AR-15s sitting there at the turnstiles, waiting to go through your bags. That's authoritarian. That is not democracy. Again, we are turning ourselves to the right with no way to go back to the left. Turning ourselves to the right with no way to go back to the left. Always moving more conservative, never going more liberal. And that's been going on, again, since at least Bill Clinton. And so when you hear these people say that, oh, we've got these crazy leftist communists, they're actually running the country, there is no left party in America. Those LGBTQ members that seemingly have the world by the balls because as soon as you say, hey, I don't think boys born with penises are women, or I don't think biological men should be able to swim against biological females, or I don't think that my 2-year-old has the capability to understand that he actually is a woman in a man's body. Once you don't agree with them, you're a racist, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're a white supremacist, you're a misogynist, you're an evil person. They're not left. Leftists, like myself, I'm actually so far left that I don't know if I can get away with saying this on YouTube, but I'm going to anyway. I'm actually an anarchist. I don't believe in having an authoritarian government. I believe that in a perfect society, you and I, if we have differences of opinion, we can sit down, talk it out, and come to a mutual agreement. That's That's anarchy. The way they portray anarchy is that it's just everybody blowing up buildings and setting fire and stealing and shooting and killing and murderous and wild, wild westing. That's not anarchy. Anarchy is the idea that there is no authoritarian political opponent because you and I, as grown adults, can sit down and come to a mutual agreement. But we don't have a left party in this country. Those people that claim to be left, the alphabet company, right? The LGBTQIRABSTSC4 plus whatever group, believe that if you don't believe what they believe, then your ideas should be censored. Your speech should be censored. Your right to protest should be censored. That's not a leftist idea. That is a very conservative idea. And that's why Joe Biden has teamed up with social media companies like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook to censor people who have dissenting opinions. Again, not a leftist term, not a leftist idea, a very conservative ideal. We're talking Nazi Germany type ideology here. That is not a leftist term. If you and I don't agree on some things, we don't agree on some things. That's it. A leftist would say, you know what? I don't agree with what you're saying, but I agree with the right for you to say that. That's what a leftist would say. That is not what the so-called left in American politics are saying. They're saying they should have the right to censor you because what you're saying is dangerous because I'm too stupid to decipher what you're saying and make an opinion for myself. That's what they're saying. They would rather not tell you what's going on than let you make an informed decision. That is not leftist policy. That is very, very super conservative, right-wing, Nazi fascist ideology. And that's what our Democrats bring to us now. I do bring this up, though, because I do actually have hope. So I had mentioned before, normally we have the two major parties and some fringe third-party candidates. There is a gentleman out there with a very esteemed name, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is running an independent campaign because he tried to run in the Democratic primary and run as a Democrat, which he technically identifies as. His whole family has been Democrats since his uncle, JFK. And Joe Biden sued to have him thrown off. They changed the rules of the primary to make sure that whatever votes RFK got did not go to RFK and went to Joe Biden instead. Again, not democratic, not giving you the choice of a free and fair society. They're choosing who you pick, which is authoritarian. So he decides to suspend his Democratic primary campaign and run as an independent. Now, he is well above the 15% national threshold to get on the ballot in all 50 states, and he has secured enough signatures in each individual state to be on all 50 states' ballot. However, again, Biden is trying to sue to get him thrown off. And that's why the mainstream media keeps calling him this crazy conspiracy theorist, even though he's not a conspiracy theorist. He was actually very right on the COVID vaccine, but it was against what the mainstream media and the Biden administration narrative was telling you. And so they call him a conspiracy theorist. They call him a spoiler, and they're trying everything they can do to not allow you to choose for him. But he is gaining steam. They're starting to bring him on. He was on CNN. He was on Fox News. And instead of kowtowing to their questions like most politicians do, he was up there telling you truth. This is why Biden is dangerous to democracy. This is why Donald Trump is dangerous to democracy. This is what they're not talking about, and this is what I'm talking about, specifically in terms of our society as a health society. We're not a healthy society. We are spoon-fed sugar from the time we're 2 years old until the day we die at, well, now, what's 73? When his dad was running for president, when his uncle was president, we had a rough age of expectation around 82 to 86 years old. We are now at 73. And it is directly because of the food they are feeding. And our Robert F. Kennedy is talking about how we can get back to the healthy days because he's willing to take on big pharma. He's willing to take on big agriculture. And while I don't agree with all of his stances on all of his policies, he is by far and away the one that will help middle America and poor America way more than either of the two major candidates. So there is hope, and I encourage you to look up Robert Kennedy Jr. because his campaign is gaining steam. Is he going to have as much money as Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Absolutely not. But with a grassroots organization that is aimed at helping the working poor, he can go in and win. And the reason is because a rising tide raises all boats. The idea is if you help the poorest people in the country, it also inadvertently helps everybody else because now the poor have money, they can contribute to society, which ups the stock value of your companies. The other aspect of it, and this is why ideology and race and gender is such a big formula in nowadays, is because we divide everything black and white, Hispanic and Asian, trans, straight. Everything is brought along those lines because they're minuscule populations of America. Whereas if you were to raise everything on a class awareness issue like Martin Luther King did, like JFK did, now you're hitting everybody. It's not just black people that are poor. White people are poor as well. So if you're promising to help the poor, you've got the white people that need the help that are willing to vote for you and the black people that are poor that you're willing to help. They come together, they unite the country. That is how you bring this country back together, is by looking at it as a class issue, not a race or sex issue. And that's what RFK is doing, despite the fact that everybody's calling him a conspiracy theorist and a fringe candidate and a spoiler and all this other jargon. But that is why the Ratchet Effect, which is what I really wanted to talk about, is what is causing the systemic issues of this country. And people need to know what they're getting into when they decide to vote for a Republican or a Democrat. Get a little cough FA for our first commercial break. That one ran a little long, so we'll just kind of go right into the gaming segment. All right, so now that that's all taken care of, let's get into something a little bit more fun and friendly, right? Family friendly. Today in our gaming segment, I'm not going to talk about video games. I love video games, and it is mostly I would say my biggest hobby, biggest passion right now. But when I'm not playing video games, the other type of games that I love to play, I absolutely love to play, are board games. Now, I know as an American, board games are kind of like, they're not really looked at as such a great thing anymore, because we grew up with kind of, I'm not going to lie, lame board games. We had some fun ones, Chutes and Ladders, we also had some, Sorry, Mousetrap. The fun games when you're 4 or 5 years old and you don't really know any better. We've also had some really terrible games like Monopoly that turn people off from board games altogether, because everybody, I know anyway, when we start playing Monopoly, we get about 2 or 3 turns in and people just get super upset at everybody else and why you got money and I don't got money, blah, blah, blah. Monopoly is a terrible game, okay? That's just the end-all be-all. But board games are great. They're the original social gaming, right? Because you have different friends of different backgrounds, of different ideals, of different ways of thinking, coming together and enjoying an experience together, and it forces you to commingle. It encourages critical thinking, on the fly adaptation, and it really makes you understand a different way of viewing things. And so board games are great. I absolutely adore them. So I want to go over my top 5 favorite board games, at least right now anyway. They do change over time because, one, they're always coming out. Germany specifically, Europe, they love board games way, way more than we do in America. So there's always new ones coming out, and there's always great ones coming out. But so for right now, my top 5 board games that I highly encourage you guys to check out. One of which, number 5, is kind of hard to come by nowadays, but you can find them on eBay. But number 5, Pirates Cove. This is a fantastic game where you get to play as pirates, and who doesn't like to play as pirates? You have your ship, you build your ship, you recruit your crew, you build your cannons, you build your hull so you can pull around more treasure chests and loot. You have your sails so you can go faster, and you get to go first in fighting. It's just fun to be a pirate. You can fight the other players if you go to the same island. And they have legendary pirates that you can also attack as well. There's what I like best about it the most, though, is while it's sometimes fun to build this unbeatable ship that goes around and just fights everybody, there's also a very great way to play the game where you don't fight anyone. And the way you do that is being able to anticipate where your opponents are going to go, so you go to different islands than they do. That's my favorite part of the game, is being able to read people's ships, get the idea of what loot is on each island, where people might go, and figuring out where they're not going so you can avoid that fighting until you absolutely want to. And so not just being the pirate, but plundering, going to Treasure Island and dumping your treasure down for victory points, but being able to outthink your opponents on a strategical basis really makes Pirates Cove one of my favorite games to play right now. Number 4 is called Seven Wonders. It's a civilization-based game. It is a small-scale civilization game where each member it's 3 to 7 players. Each player has their own civilization, and depending on which civilization they have, they build their society towards that civilization. There's many different ways to win depending on the colors of your card. There's military, there's specialty cards, there's guild cards. Your wonder gives you points. There's many different ways to win because of it, and it's very unique in the fact that everybody shares the cards. So everybody starts with a handful of cards themselves. They choose one to play, and then you pass that deck. You pass your hand to the next person over, and the person from your other side. Everybody's sharing these cards. So you have to think what they're doing, what they're going for, what card helps me now, but what card also helps me later. And it's a very unique way to play it because everybody's sharing these different cards. And it really makes you kind of not just think for the moment, but think for the future as well. It's also very quick. Every game takes about 40 to 45 minutes, so you can play it a ton of times, and you can really do a bunch of variations. It's one of those games that's kind of simple to play, hard to master, but because it's such a quick game, you can usually play 2 or 3 times in a row before people really get bored from it. Number 3 would be another card-based game. It's called Dominion. Dominion also has many different game types built into the base deck. The game actually comes with 10 different play styles that you can play with just the base deck. They've got expansions and stuff that add more different ways to win. But essentially, you use your cards to buy other cards, which then give you more turns, more actions, more money to buy different cards with and stuff. and eventually earn victory points. But because of the multitude of ways to play, there's the base game, there's big money, there's I can't remember any of the names of the other ones, but but there's 8 different setups that you play with different types of cards. Everybody picks from those cards, and you have to develop your own strategy while your opponents are also developing their own strategy to figure out a way to be the first one to buy victory points and buy the most victory points. That's a very unique way to play the game that gives you multiple opportunities to play several different ways. It's also another very quick game, so you can play it a multitude of times. Number 2 would be this game called Stone Age. Now, for a long time, Stone Age was actually my very favorite game. It was the first one that wasn't Sorry or Monopoly or Chutes and Ladders that I was ever introduced to. And so it kind of holds a special place in my heart. They're really the one that, this is really the one that introduced me to actual board games, right? And not just, again, the cheap stuff. And so it will always kind of hold that special place in my heart as the first one that introduced me to what board games can be. But it's just a resource management game. You have a little tribe, and you have to harvest wood, brick, stone, and gold to build huts, buy unique cards. You can increase your villagers. You can increase the amount of food your village produces. Increase the amount of tools your village can use, then resource goods, and you use those goods to buy huts or specialty cards that then give you victory points at the end. It's a very fun kind of like thinking game. And so what I mean by that is you have to determine what is more beneficial, building these huts or buying these cards. Can I create more villagers so I can then resource more stuff or do more actions? But I got to feed these people. Am I going to be able to feed these people? And so it's a very management type game that, yes, it sort of relies on what your opponents are doing. That has somewhat of, an on-the-fly adaptation, but it's mostly about what you do, right? How you decide to manage your civilization, your little village. And so it really kind of gives you a chance to, while you're playing with others, really kind of do your own thing and see how well it works. It was the first one that really kind of, and again, it was really kind of the first one that made me want to keep playing board games. Before that, I'd played Risk a couple of times. Now, there's different variations of Risk that are actually very good, but the original Risk board game, if you get certain territories, it's pretty much over and no one wants to play anymore. But there are so many different ways to win in Stone Age that it gives you not just adaptability, but it gives you original gameplay over and over and over again. Now, along those same lines, my favorite game, and this has actually been my favorite game for a long time, it might be my favorite game going forward, is a game called Puerto Rico. What I love about Puerto Rico more than anything is there is no luck. There's no dice rolling. There's no random cards that cause damage to this or that. There's no outside influences that you don't have control of. And what I mean by that is every time everybody takes a turn, everybody gets to do that turn. So whether you build buildings or ship goods or harvest goods or whatever, it's totally up to you how you dictate moving forward. And so everything that you do is a deciding factor into the eventual outcome of the game. Now, there is a little bit of anticipating what others are going to do because of the way the turns take place. So if it's my turn, I choose a category that we're going to do. Maybe I want to create goods. Everybody creates goods. Next player turns, he wants to build something. He gets to build first. Now, there's only a finite number of buildings. So if he builds the building before I get to build a building, I've got to learn how to adapt on the fly, and I got to figure out what to do. But if you can kind of get into a rhythm where you believe if you do this, it's going to cause your opponent to do that, then you can kind of use them in a way that not only makes them feel like they're in the lead, but gives you the opportunity to do multiple turns in the same round. And so it is a real strategical game based on your actions alone, and not, oh shit, I needed to roll a 6, I rolled a 5, right? There's no, oh man, I really needed to pull a card that allowed me to attack this guy, and instead I pull an earthquake card, and now all my guys are dead. There is no randomness to that effect. Everything you do leads to the eventual outcome of the game. It's as close to a perfect board game as I've ever played. And that's probably why it's my favorite. I also happen to be really good at it, so it's kind of a bummer because no one ever wants to play with me. But those are, if I was introducing people to board games to play, these would be the 5 that I would use to introduce people to. Now, I would probably start with the quicker ones like Seven Wonders and Dominion before, and then probably Pirates Cove or Stone Age after that. Puerto Rico would probably be the one that I would introduce last, because, again, it does take a bit of concentration, a bit of know-how, and a bit of understanding how board games work. And I've had some friends that, while they love the quick play games like Seven Wonders and Dominion, they don't really have the attention span to play something like Puerto Rico. But Pirates Cove, Seven Wonders, Dominion, Stone Age, and Puerto Rico are the 5 games, the 5 board games that I would use to introduce people to actual board games. That was a little closer to time, but we did take some time in that first. So second little break. Be sure to hit your boy up with a sponsorship if you know of it. Yeah. Okay. Now we're getting into our sports segment. This segment is, it could be positive, it could be negative. So pretty much exactly how I expected. I had mentioned this in the last podcast when we were entering the fantasy basketball playoffs, that I did feel that I would make it to the Final Four, which I did, but I didn't think I had a team that was really that was really good enough to actually win the championship. And so we did go in and we won our first game. But when we got matched up with the 1 overall seed, we kind of got stomped. And it was pretty easy to see because, one, I didn't really barely. I mean, I did win by about 100, 150 points. But it was pretty toe-to-toe for most of that first week of playoffs. And a lot of my best players were day-to-day, or they were out, or they were just not playing for whatever reason. And that kind of continued into the second round. Now, I am going for third place, but we're still kind of in that same situation. Whereas right now, 4 of my 5 best players played a whopping 2 games last week. And they haven't played any games in the first 2 days of our third place, our final week of the playoffs. So there's a very good chance. I mean, I'm only down like maybe 20 or 30 right now. So there is a chance, if they start coming back, that I have a chance to take third place. But I was not surprised at all that the 1 seed, the team that was, I think, 18-2 or something like that, was able to beat me pretty handily in the last round. Especially, when your best players aren't playing. The issue being, you can't really drop them, because what if for some reason you actually do win? You don't want to drop them because then you don't have them for the next week. And so while I was able to do a couple of adding drops, the truth is I just didn't have the manpower to go all the way. And it kind of looks like this week is probably going to be the same thing. So I'm assuming, I don't know yet, we'll know at the end of Sunday, but I'm assuming I'm probably going to take 4th, which in my opinion really isn't that bad. 4 out of 8, considering basketball is my least favorite of the 4 major sports. Um, I'll take that to be one of the top 4 teams. It's funny because our division we had 3 teams make the playoffs, and 3 teams make the playoffs in the other division. However, our division was all outside of one team. Three of us 4 were winning records, and then only one of the 4 teams in the other division was a winning record. So it just kind of strange how that kind of happens sometimes. But no surprise. I unfortunately didn't make it to the finals of the basketball fantasy playoffs. Now, however, on the flip side, we start our fantasy hockey playoffs this week. I ended up being the 2 seed, although I did win my division. Now, in this one, we only had 6 teams, so only the top 4 make it. So there was no bye for the division winner. We just play top 4 and then the final. I am taking on the 3rd place finisher, who was also in my division. So we've played each other a couple of times. I'm off to a pretty good start. I think I'm up. I'm up about 15 or 20 points right now. We'll see how that goes. I have been one of the highest scorers throughout the season, and I have the 2nd best record in the league. So I do have high expectations for this one. Now, one of the reasons I do so is my whole team is healthy. I don't have anybody that's out. I don't have anybody that's day to day right now. But more importantly, most of my team are players on teams vying for the real playoffs and a playoff spot or playoff seeding. Like the Detroit Red Wings right now are tied for the 2nd wild card in the East. I've got a lot of players from the Tampa Bay Lightning who are going for the number 1 seed. And so I've got a lot of players that are probably going to play for the rest of this regular season, barring any injury circumstance or whatnot. And so I do have a good feeling about this team. I have high expectations. Whether we win or not, we shall see. But I do expect to win and make it to the final. Win this week and make it to the final, where I'll probably go against. Right now, the 4 seed is actually beating the 1 seed, which would be great because I've matched up much better against the 4 seed in the regular season than I have against the 1 seed. So if that upset could happen, I feel like I have a pretty good chance of taking home the title. Which would also be kind of cool because if you don't remember, I did win the fantasy football league, and so if I could win the fantasy hockey league, that'd be 2 championships in the same year. That'd be pretty cool too. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it happens and how the rest of the regular season in hockey plays out. I am from Michigan, so I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan. I'm really pushing for the Red Wings. They haven't made the playoffs in a long time. I don't want to say a long time because we're talking, maybe 8 or 9 years or something. Maybe I don't think it's been a decade since they've made it, but maybe. But I mean, they, for a very long time, Detroit, is called Hockey Town for a reason. That's why my fantasy team's the Hockey Town Hooligans. They've been a very, very competitive and dominant team for a very long time. And so for us to have this rough skid, whether it's 4 or 5 years or 10, 11, 12 years, to make the playoffs again would be a big boon to the city of Detroit because, we've had such a history of being one of the top teams in the NHL. So, and then last week, we started our fantasy baseball teams. I ended up being the high scorer of the week, 1-0. I'm currently beating the other guy in our in my division right now. So we'll see how this week goes. Could be a good start, 2-0 against the division. I was able to finish as the 1 seed last year in baseball, and then I got knocked out in my first playoff game, which was kind of a bummer. So it was kind of disappointing, but high hopes for fantasy hockey. And next week we'll probably talk March Madness. Man, I only got one of the 4 Final Four teams right, but in all likelihood, there's a very good chance that I at least got the national champion right, which I don't remember the last time I did that. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about baseball next week. But high hopes for fantasy hockey, and I don't want to say disappointing end for fantasy basketball, but not what I was hoping for. But injuries happen, and that's a part of life. Need to shave. Gillette, you want to sponsor your boy? By all means. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All right. We have come to that time. It is our final segment. We are talking about the cinema. And now, again, we call this the cinema segment because I don't want to just focus on movies. I want to talk about TV shows and stuff too. However, today we are going to focus on the film aspect of it. And what made me think of this is my wife and I came across a movie that I hadn't seen in a very long time, but was very dear to me as I was growing up. And so we saw this clip. I showed her a clip on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. The movie is Major League. It stars Charlie Sheen, Tom Berenson, Wesley Snipes. It's a fantastic movie, comedy movie about the struggling Cleveland Indians. And the scene that came up on Twitter was Willie Mays Hayes pulling up to spring practice, spring training. And he comes up, he pulls his little Beetle Rolls Royce combo looking car right up to the head coaches and goes, "Hey, my name is Willie Mays Hayes. Run like Mays, hit like Hayes." Or something like hit like Mays, run like Hayes. That's what he says. And so, I start quoting this movie, right? And my wife is like, what movie is that? So I had to show her. Thank the Lord, it actually happened to be on Netflix. 9 times out of 10, if there's a movie that I want to watch, it's not on Netflix. And so we start watching this movie, and I couldn't believe how much of this movie that I actually remembered. I'm doing, I'm quoting lines before they're being said. I'm talking about, this is the funny part. This is when this happened and all this stuff. And, it kind of got me thinking, like, it really kind of took me back a little bit because it got me hyped for movies. Like, I used to be hyped for movies. And, I was thinking about it, and my wife and I are talking about it. It is not a movie that would be able to get made today. There's, I don't want to say a lot of misogyny, but I mean, there's rude gestures and stuff like that in that type of movie. And now maybe Major League can get made today. But it does come from an era where a lot of the jokes are jokes based on stereotypes and stuff. And so they wouldn't be able to get made today. And it brought me to, it made me think that, maybe that's why I'm not as passionate about movies as I was. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still a bunch of filmmakers out there that I absolutely love it when they're putting out a movie. Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, Paul Thomas Anderson. I love their work, and so Quentin Tarantino. But these are guys outside of Martin Scorsese and to a certain extent Christopher Nolan now. But David Fincher really only makes a movie every 4 or 5 years. Paul Thomas Anderson 5 to 10. Quentin Tarantino doesn't seem to make any movies anymore. Although I think he's announced that he's writing, his official last one. But they don't make movies every year like some people do. Again, outside of maybe Martin Scorsese, who seems to come out with a movie once or twice a year. But there are still certain filmmakers out there that I get excited about. But I don't feel the same passion for film today as I did growing up. And I tried to. It started to make me kind of really wonder what it was about those movies that made me want to go into Hollywood in the first place. And there's a few that like I really enjoyed as a kid. Like my brother and I used to watch The Sandlot every day, growing up, every day. Um, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one, the first movie, was something that really inspired me because here's this, comic book, here's this cartoon character, here's these toy action figures that I love, and now all of a sudden they're real, right? They're walking among actual people on screen in a live action film, and they're doing what they do in the comic book and in the video games and stuff. Now they came out with a couple others. Secret of the Ooze was kind of a silly one, and then Turtles in Time was basically a farce. But but for the most part, the first one was like a huge influence on me. You've got Ghostbusters, right? Something that my brother and I and my two cousins, we used to dress up as the Ghostbusters all the time, right? It was something that we did like every Halloween, right? And so to see these guys on screen being the Ghostbusters, not just anybody either. It's Dan Aykroyd, it's Bill Murray, right? Like it's um, these great, memorable actors doing these iconic roles that I've grown up loving, and it made me want to do the same thing. Um, Now, specifically, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was kind of the one that was like, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And it was, we watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, we watched Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but then you come out and you're in the theater and you're watching Last Crusade, and it's young Indiana, right? Played by the amazing River Phoenix, who, rest in peace, he was fantastic. And he should have been a big star had he not unfortunately passed away much earlier than he should have. But here's young Indiana Jones, and I'm like maybe 14 at the time, and that's when I recognized myself in that character, and I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so from then on, for a little while there, I wanted to be an athlete, but once I realized that was probably not going to be a thing, movies were always the other thing that I wanted to do. And so, watching those movies really gave me a passion for filmmaking, and it's what encouraged me to go to Specs Howard. It's what encouraged me to go to Michigan State. I went to Michigan State specifically because that's where Sam Raimi went, and Sam Raimi made the Spider-Man movies. Spider-Man has been my favorite comic book character since I was 6 years old. And so I go to Michigan State specifically for that, so I can study under the teacher that taught Sam Raimi how to be a filmmaker. I moved out to LA to be a part of it, and like the Red Hot Chili Peppers say, some dreams are meant to be declined. Unfortunately, I never got to be the a famous actor or director or anything. And I mean, there's still time. Who knows what happens? But when I got out there had been a generational shift in the way we made movies, right? I grew up with the Happy Gilmores and the Billy Madisons and the Tommy Boys. I mean, Tommy Boy. I remember David Spade on the plane on their way to Chicago. Well, let me tell you, if you the big end goes in the little end, and well, if you don't know how to use a seatbelt, come call Tommy in the back, and he'll hit you over the head with a tack hammer because you are a retard, right? You can't get away with those types of jokes nowadays. If you go back and you watch the Popeye live action movie with Robin Williams, he is hilarious. And he's got all these innuendo jokes in there that you don't notice as a kid. You definitely notice as an adult. But there's no way that anybody would finance those movies now because of all the Karens out there that would immediately complain, and they would go to Facebook and they would start a campaign to get you canceled and stop the film from being produced. And so we've lost that passion, right? And so when I got out to LA, all my excitement, I don't want to say all my excitement, because there's still a part of me that thinks, hey, I can still change this. There's still time. People are itching to get back to the way they were. The woke mob, right? The tyranny of the minority is just what's happening, and there's still time to change it, right? There's still time to get back to what was good before the wokesters destroyed it. And but the truth is, like, once I got out there and this whole ideology changed, it was like a gut punch, right? It was like getting kicked in the stomach and all your air just gets knocked out of you and you're like, right? You just have this moment of reflection going, this is not what I come out here to make. And so I lost a lot of the passion that I had, which is one of the reasons, probably a good reason why I don't I don't still do all that kind of stuff. Now, granted, I put out 100 resumes and got no calls back, so that's probably another good reason why. But the truth is, like, it's just not the same as it was. There just isn't that passion behind it, and you can see it in the movies, right? Like, I mean, Endgame and Infinity War are the exact same movie outside of 30 minutes. They're both 3.5 hour films, and only 30 minutes of those 3.5 hours are different. Madame Web came out, nobody saw it, right? Captain Marvel came out, nobody bothered to see it. Movie going, the box office, I know Godzilla vs. Kong or whatever did really well, but we're talking 194 million. Spider-Man did 450 million its opening weekend. So there's clearly a drop off in what people want out of movies compared to what we used to get. And so I don't think I do feel the same. Now, part of me still feels like I can be the change that I want to see in film. But it's hard to want to write something or want to shoot something or want to edit something that you have a fairly certain idea is probably never going to get made, or if you make it on your own dime is probably never going to get put into a theater because those theaters or those production companies or those distribution companies don't want the headache of the Karens coming out and railing against you. And so it was really refreshing, actually, watching Major League, and it's made me want to go back and watch a lot of the stuff that I grew up with to reignite that passion. Because I do believe that we can still make great stuff. I mean, Christopher Nolan makes fantastic stuff. David Fincher makes great movies. Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson. These guys that I still look up to make fantastic films. And every once in a while, a Napoleon Dynamite will come out, and it's like, how the fuck did this get made? And so there's still that possibility, and I really want to get back to the passion that I had for cinema and film and movies that I had when I was growing up, because this is the way of storytelling. I know we have podcasts and stuff like that, but the visual medium where you have both picture and sound, right? You have special effects and you have drama and tension, and this is still the modern way to to tell stories. And so I want them to be great again, and I want to be a part of what brings them back to greatness. But that's those are just my thoughts and opinions, and I hope you guys kind of feel the same way. So that's going to wrap up this episode. Do me that favor, if there's anything that you want me to talk about specifically, hit up the comments below and let me know. Be like, hey, I would really love your opinion on this, or this, and let me know what you guys think. I'm always looking for ideas to come up with, and it's always fun kind of just spouting off. So be sure to, if you made it this far, do me that favor, hit that like, hit that sub, hit that notification, hit that follow if you're over on Spotify, wherever you happen to be. Become part of the Sweetness family. Join the Discord. Follow me over on Instagram and Twitter. If you're on YouTube, follow me over on Spotify. Do your boy a favor, become part of the Sweetness family, and let's grow this community, and let's get back to making America great again. um, but really, if you've made it this far, thank you guys so much for listening and sticking it out with me. And I hope you continue watching or listening wherever you might be. But that's gonna wrap this one up. That's gonna do it for this one. Wherever you might be, how am I gonna? I have to adapt. I got to think on the fly, like in a board game, right? We got to adapt. That's gonna do it for this one. BigSweetC, that's me. Wishing YouTube, Spotify, wherever you might be, that's you. Wonderful day, night, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it might be. As long as you're watching, listening, hearing, seeing, I'm just wishing you a wonderful watching time. That's gonna do it for this one. Sweetness. Signing off. Peace.